Welcome back. Welcome to the very first episode of Seasoned Professional. I'm your host, Hannah Octavia, and like many of us, I still struggle with that timeless question, what do I want to be when I grow up? In this series, my guests and I will engage in honest, insightful conversations about the complexities of finding purpose and meaning in our work. Whether you're a recent graduate, a seasoned professional, or simply searching for direction, join me every Sunday as we explore the journey of self-discovery and tackle that age-old question, what do I want to be when I grow up? Today we're kicking off with a career that exemplifies the power of stepping outside your comfort zone to achieve success. My guest is a veterinarian, animal rights advocate, author, TV personality, and documentarian. He'll share how his father's influence, especially his encouragement of creativity and a love of knowledge, helped shape the path he walks today. His tireless work in animal welfare earned him an OBE, and his ongoing mission to expose the cruel practices of puppy and kitten farming has inspired many. It's my honor to welcome this incredible man, a true success by many standards, and most importantly, a kind and gracious soul. Here to share his story, please welcome Marc Abraham. Hello, welcome to the show, Marc Abraham. We are so pleased to have you here today.
Very pleased to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Anytime. Currently, he's a bit uncomfortable because I've taken his side of the couch, so we'll see if you talk to me after this.
Yeah, I may just have to speak backwards because this is all the wrong way around.
Fair enough, but this is the better side of my face.
So anyone listening, just play it backwards like those old Beatles songs and you'll hear the proper lyrics.
Fabulous. Well, now you know how to listen. We're going to start with our very first question today.
Or very last.
That is true.
Yeah.
Very last. So we kind of always start our podcast looking at a picture from your childhood. So we've got the lovely little Marc Abraham. Do you want to just pop it off the wall for us?
Yeah.
You can take it right off.
I can?
Yes, you can.
Okay.
There you are.
Am I showing it this way?
Absolutely. You can take, lovely. So for the people who are listening right now, describe what we're looking at.
It's a little kid with a Mickey Mouse t-shirt on with three big macaws upon him. Upon him. One on the head and one on each shoulder.
And how old do you think you are there, roughly?
Well, I've just called my mum to ask.
Yeah.
And she reckons around 5 years old.
Around 5 years old.
Yeah. And this was apparently just before they lifted me up and flew me off to their nest for the day. But yeah, when they brought me back, I had so many stories to tell my folks.
Amazing. Yeah. Amazing. And where was this picture taken? We'll just pop it.
Apparently it was taken in some sort of parrot sanctuary in Florida.
Lovely.
Yes.
Amazing. And do you have a lot of memories of that day?
No. Zero. But all I know is I would do anything to be around animals and let them walk on me, crawl on me, fly me to their nest, whatever they wanted to do. I was more of an animal than a human for a long, long time.
Interesting. Why? How? In what way? More of an animal than a human?
I used to just be more comfortable hanging out with frog spawn, with broken eggshells, feathers, caterpillars, moths, butterflies, than interacting with other human beings.
Interesting.
I was incredibly introvert, very, very shy, and just was more comfortable. When my parents went to their friends, as soon as we arrived, I just was handed a jam jar, and I just disappeared for the whole time.
Yeah.
And then sort of came back when they were ready to go with all different things in the jam jar that I collected, and then I used to take it home. Empty the jam jar, nothing died, and then I drew everything and identified everything. So it's like an information hoarder, obsessive collector of nature.
Wow.
But everything was then put back and released back into the wild.
That's quite an interesting thing too. You don't really hear that very often of kids being so...
I don't think they can go off on their own anymore.
That is true.
Yeah.
That is true.
So that was in the 70s when I guess it was safer. Maybe my folks didn't like me that much and they just wanted rid of me. But I think it was safer to go off into the fields or to ponds and to do your own thing. And there wasn't as much stranger danger as there is now.
Interesting. Well, thank you for sharing your photo of the macaque. You
My
can pop
absolute-
that back on our wall for us.
Okay.
Let's see if you can do it.
I think I can
Let's
manage.
see. Oh. How are we looking, Elliot?
Really?
Perfect. Lovely. Alrighty. Awesome. So we already know that you were a lover of animals. So what was your dream career as a child at that young age?
So the story goes, at 3 years old, I had a pet tortoise called Speedy. And back then they were all called Speedy. And it was always written on the back of their shell, usually in nail varnish, not mine. And a phone number was always written on the back of the shell. And this Speedy tortoise used to escape out of the garden and used to get phone calls. Tortoises back in the garden. Anyway, one day Speedy had a wound on his leg. And in the wound was a maggot, which is the larvae of a blue bottle fly. And I genuinely remember this. I got a twig from the garden and I scooped out the maggot and gave it a clean. And the leg got better and the tortoise got better. And I had the feeling of making an animal better.
Yeah.
And helping an animal. And that was it. And from then on, from 3 years old, all I wanted to do was help animals. Yeah, it's weird. So in a weird way, what I wanted to do was so easy and straightforward because it was the only thing I ever wanted to do from the beginning. And there was never, ever any variation. And I knew I had to get into vet school. So I studied and was a nerd and a geek. And I think back then we called them squares, losers. And I just carried on working and doing homework and hoarding information and anything I possibly could. Duke of Edinburgh's award, working at the local vets in my teenage years and holidays and weekends. Anything I possibly could to guarantee or give myself the best chance to get into vet school. Because back then, as it is now, it's one of the hardest degrees to get into. Mainly because it's so popular, but also because there's few vet schools. So there's always a number of candidates trying to get into for every position. But yeah, I eventually got into Edinburgh University and then I could kind of learn how to socialise and interact with other people because before then I was still very shy, very introvert because all I wanted to do was be a vet. And the other thing I was always obsessed with was comedy. So I used to write out comedy, watch comedy, record it, write it out, recite it. Back then it was sort of Blackadder. It was that era. Saturday Night Live, Friday Night Live. And Young Ones, and yeah, it was nerdy, nature, geeky, science, animals, and then comedy. Those were my two loves, and football as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I had a bit of a weird upbringing. It wasn't a normal one. My sister was the rebel. She was 4 years older, and she went out drinking and partying and being a normal person. I was the sort of reclusive one that just preferred to stay home and study and draw out ordnance survey maps for fun. Yeah.
And so you seem like you were a bit of an anomaly in the family. Would you say that's probably
definitely.
correct?
I think I was a bit of an anomaly in society, to be honest with you, not just my family.
Yeah.
I definitely felt alone, but I was with my friends who were usually four-legged or swimming in a pond.
And so you remember that. It's interesting that you remember that young memory at the age of 3 with the maggot story. And I think a lot of children would not react in that way. So it's interesting that you had that like nurturing kind of innate thing about you that was so clear from such a young age. Did you tell me about like your siblings? Were you the youngest? Were you the oldest?
Just the older sister.
Just the older sister.
And I always had a cat growing up. Never had a dog. Always had a cat. First one called Susie. Next one was called Fluffy. Briefly one called Rabbit. But I always had a pet cat. And tortoise in the early years. And then all the other stuff, the butterflies and the tadpoles were sort of extra pets, if you like, bonus pets.
Yeah. So what would you do with the butterflies?
I'd just be fascinated by them. So we had the big butterfly bush outside our house where I grew up in northwest London, and obviously for a nature nerd, just to identify them. Sometimes catch them, hold them, release them. Fascinating. Caterpillars, the eggs that they lay, the butterflies lay. Finding a chrysalis was like Christmas. So yeah, I was fascinated. Also all the other stuff like capital cities, flags. I remember going on a school trip to Switzerland and learning all the canton flags, so the county flags in Switzerland, which are on every number plate. I can still do it now. The other day went to a dog show and a Swiss car parked next to us.
Yeah.
And I said, that's from Vol. And they were like, how on earth do you know that? It's like, I can't remember what I did yesterday, but I can remember learning my Swiss canton flags 40 years ago. Not even learning, just wanting to know.
Yeah.
Because learning sounds forced, but it was literally wanting to know everything about every country and just hoarding information.
Where do you think that comes from? Like that need to know?
Hunger for knowledge.
Yeah.
There was also a thing growing up called the Joy of Knowledge, which was every 2 weeks it came out in the newsagent, and then you got a binder and you put them all in atlases, bird books, obviously, caterpillar books, butterfly books. Everything was about facts.
Yeah.
I don't think I ever read a book that wasn't factual. It was, they were all non-fiction. And as I say, mainly they were atlases or encyclopedias. Literally, I just had to learn. But it wasn't history, and it wasn't law, and it wasn't politics, and it wasn't any of that other stuff. It was just science and nature and geography.
Interesting.
Just those 3 pieces of cake on the Trivial Pursuit
is what your specialized subject.
Pretty much. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, that's so fascinating to me because, I feel like a lot of kids these days, it's just a completely different story, and like, it's so refreshing to hear that you really nurtured that knowledge that you wanted to know, and like that you.
It still goes on. I mean, we live in Brighton, obviously, and if I'm early for work in Rottingdean where I work, I'll go down to the rock pools if there's a low tide, and I'll take pictures of anemones, and I'll take crabs, and it's still there.
Yeah,
and
it's still there.
And it's still as fascinating as it was then. But I do wish, as you say, more people would embrace what's on our doorstep rather than be obsessed with the latest Netflix sort of box set. Do you know what I mean? There's some real wholesome stuff out there that we have a direct contact and relationship with, rather than being stuck inside and just fascinated by this screen on the wall. And I think, even when I go swimming in the sea here, it's always with goggles, and it's always diving down and trying to find stuff, even though you don't really find much on this beach.
Yeah.
But there's always the possibility, and I think that is the driver.
Yeah.
You just never know. So yeah.
Amazing.
And even, walking on the downs, identifying butterflies, identifying birds by their bird song, by their feathers. I mean, people who walk with me are like, here we go, and I've got my binoculars. But last weekend we went with a friend. I mean, they're also members, but their son's called Monty, and he's, I think, 9. And to then pass on what I know to him, it's like, here's the binoculars. Check out those 3 Canada geese goslings over there, and you feel like you're sort of passing it on, and hopefully, maybe inspiring another generation. It's what my dad did with me. He would always sort of teach and show me and expose me to every possible kind of situation he possibly could.
And what did your dad do?
He was in advertising.
Okay, interesting.
He was a creative in advertising, came up with quite a few iconic brands and commercials. And weirdly, I mean, obviously we'll talk about campaigning, but the process of campaigning is very similar with advertising, and also campaigning to change laws. We never really had that conversation, sadly. But at the end of the day, you're coming up with a concept and a solution, and you're trying to influence as many people as possible and persuade them to do that thing, whether it's to buy a product or to sign and share a petition. But the kind of the behaviour change and the sort of, I guess that you could say the science behind it is very similar.
Did you spend a lot of time with your dad as a child? Yeah.
And my mum. But I think I was closest to my dad in terms of the stuff that we did together, and the sort of used to test me on the capital cities and test me on, it was always, but not in a strict way.
No, of course.
But it was always sort of fun learning at every possible opportunity. One of the most influential things, funny enough, I did with him was we used to go to Heathrow and watch planes taking off. And interestingly, that really helped shape part of. He was into branding because he was a creative in advertising. He was a phenomenal genius, really, with branding. And I was always fascinated by airplane tails.
Interesting.
Because the airplane tail is the brand of the airline, and it always incorporates usually incorporates the flag of the country, and how you can easily identify something from a distance in 1 millisecond, what airline it is and where it's from. And I was always fascinated by that adaptation of a country's flag into the airline, like British Airways, for example. So yeah, there's opportunities everywhere to learn, and sometimes they're less obvious, sometimes they're more obvious. But there's stuff around us all the time that we can sort of get tips and hints from.
So obviously you were super studious in school, and you had this goal of going to veterinary school, and you achieved it. So bring me to those first few years of university, maybe when you were coming out of your shell, because I would never have assumed that you were an introvert, knowing you now.
Yeah, massively. As soon as I got to uni, I learned. Just before I went to uni, I met some people at my university interview, and they were all Scottish, because I went to a Scottish uni. And they invited me to Hogmanay, which, if you don't know, is the New Year's Eve. And Hogmanay in Edinburgh is probably one of the drunkest parties in the world, if not the drunkest. So I went up because I didn't really have many friends down in England. So I went out thinking, someone likes me and I can interact with other humans. And there was a pub called Deacon Brodie's on the Royal Mile, which is bang centre in the middle of Edinburgh. And I remember going to the bar, and I was with a group of Scottish 17-year-olds, male and female. Now, in Scotland, rugby is obviously a big deal, like it is in England, but it's kind of feels a bit of a bigger deal than football in Scotland and Edinburgh. And there's rugby lads, and the girls are drinking as well. And I went to the bar and ordered a Malibu and pineapple, and the barman gave it to me in a wine glass. I know now, probably just to make it even more humiliating when I went back to the table. And it's all I knew. Because I had an older sister, and that's what she drank. Back in the 80s, that's what people drank. Girls drank, not being sexist. But girls drank Malibu and pineapple as a popular drink. My sister certainly did. So I went back to this table of rugby lads and girls and everyone drinking pints with this wine glass of Malibu and pineapple. And then tried to justify the fact that it was still alcohol, so what's everyone's problem? And that was kind of the beginning of a very steep learning curve in terms of 5 years at uni in Edinburgh, and drinking and partying and actually learning what it was to be an adult rather than this sort of nerdy geek in the shadow of my older sister. So yeah, it was a crazy 5 years. It went very quickly. I realised that growing up in northwest London didn't make me an expert in farming or horses, pigs, sheep, goats, so I kind of knew I had to stick with dogs and cats. But you have to do everything when you're a vet student. And I came out the other end, and then my first job was in Watford, which is in northwest London. It was a mixed practice. Again, I sort of veered away from the cows and the sheep and the horses, stuck with small animal, really enjoyed operating, enjoyed consulting. And that was it, really. I sort of started to mould myself into a small animal vet. And then I guess the biggest life change that happened next was being on a snowboarding holiday. I think I'd only been qualified as a vet for a year. And the conditions were so poor in Avoriaz in France. I decided, sitting on the chairlift, that I had to move to France. So I chucked everything in after 18 months of being a vet in Watford, and I moved to France. And my first job was hanging up coats and cleaning the toilets in a French bar as a qualified vet. 1 night a week. And then the owner of the bar, Philippe, noticed that I was talking to everyone coming in their language, French, Swedish, Danish, whatever, because I'd learned the basics.
Oh my gosh.
And he was like, I need you behind the bar because you're remembering people and you're also anticipating their needs. So I said, I've never worked in a bar before. And he said, even better, I can tell you how we do it. And it was Café Fast, which back in 1997 was probably the best bar in the Alps. And it was part of the founding group of a group of bars called the Folie Douce, which are now in most resorts, and they're sort of parties on the mountain. But I, without knowing, was working for the guy who invented that and came up with the concept, and we had the first Folie Douce in Val d'Isère. And so I learned how to party, and I learned how to talk to French people and English people and Scandinavian people and serve drinks and be incredibly sympathetic to people who work in the service industry, which I think is incredibly important. And just, learn how to be a DJ and learn how to be a snowboard instructor. And that was kind of my teenage years.
Interesting.
In my late 20s. So I'd done the nerdy stuff, done the uni stuff, done the vetty stuff to start with, and then it was like, okay, I guess in my head it was like, it's okay now to let your hair down. I had some now. And actually do probably like rebel and do all the stuff that most people sort of do in their teenage years. So I ended up doing 3 snowboarding seasons in Val d'Isère behind the same bar, and coming back every spring to do sort of 6 months of being a vet. And that's when I kind of gravitated towards Brighton, because I was offered a job here for a weekend to cover the emergency service, and just fell in love with it because it was a bit like living in France. Same vibe, same speed, everyone hangs out, lots of different nationalities, and it was a bit like being in the ski resort. So I felt very comfortable here, but I didn't know anyone, which was fine, because by then I was super confident and I was into my DJing and my clubbing and always football. But also then Brighton became this unbelievable playground, and absolutely fell in love with it. And nothing's changed in terms of my feelings for Brighton. I've calmed down a bit. It's like a playground.
You're not DJing
it's
anymore.
A different type of playground. I'm definitely not DJing anymore. I used to run a club night here for a few years. But things change and priorities change, and now walking on the South Downs is more exciting than staying out till 4 o'clock every Saturday night. So things change, but my love of Brighton is just gets stronger and stronger.
Amazing. And before you went on your snowboard season, did you feel like that was a huge turning point in your personality almost?
Yeah,
and
100%.
when you became more of an extrovert?
100%. Yeah, because otherwise I'd never have taken that leap to literally go somewhere, because I never spoke French either. I only learnt German at school. So to go somewhere, I mean, Val d'Isère is very English spoken, but I was keen to immerse myself in French culture rather than go to the English bars. So to be embraced by Philippe, French bar, again gave a complete different perspective of living in France and the ski resort vibe, because when you walked around, you were part of the French family rather than just an English person.
Yes,
and I was making an effort, and I learned fluent French while I was there. And it got better, obviously, every season. And learned to speak Danish, learned to speak Swedish, German I spoke anyway. So all of a sudden I've gone from this sort of wallflower to being sort of multilingual, being cool, knowing what to sort of order at a bar, play some records and teach a bit of snowboarding. So it was a complete turnaround. But the geekiness was always there. It was just a chance to kind of be a different person in a weird way.
Well, it's like,
and enjoy being a different person, completely out of my comfort zone.
And did you ever, you just seemed like just to be, it almost seemed like an experiment to you.
Yeah, I guess most things have seemed like an experiment over the years.
Yeah, it's almost like you're just so fascinated with what this could reveal itself.
I do like putting myself out of my comfort zone. I think that definitely challenging yourself makes you a better person, but I think it makes you a lot more open-minded and appreciative of the world. And certainly some of the things I've done in my life have definitely been out of the comfort zone, and I would never have made progress to the next level if I hadn't done it. Live TV, for example, terrifying. But if I hadn't have done that, it wouldn't have got me on a different level for the campaigning, or a different profile that you need to engage with other people in the media. So, everything happens for a reason, and I think you should always push yourself to the point where it's uncomfortable.
Interesting.
Yeah. I've always enjoyed that.
And do you always, when you do push yourself like that, do you always reach a point of discomfort even now? Or have you gotten to the point where you're so used to it?
No, I don't think you can ever get used to it. I think if you're used to it, you become complacent, and that becomes very obvious, especially with live TV. I think it's important to be nervous. It's important to be anxious. It's important to be conscious of what you say and how you behave. Even now, not that I'm nervous, but you should always look like you care about what you're saying.
Yeah.
And as soon as you don't, people switch off. And it's important because you should care about what you're saying, especially if you're in the public eye or you're in a position that's potentially influential with regard to political campaigning. So yeah, but the first few times you do live TV, first few times you go into Westminster, first few times you operate, you are incredibly anxious, but for a reason. It's because you care.
Exactly. So bring me back to, you said your first job was in an emergency department?
No, first job was in mixed practice.
Mixed practice. Yeah. So that's farm and small animals?
Yeah.
Gotcha. And tell me about that first day. Do you remember it?
I think it was just a blur, really. I mean, it's exhilarating being a vet anyway, but when all of a sudden you've got this degree that you can give injections, you can operate, because we can operate immediately on day one, unlike doctors and surgeons. So and we're also dentists, and we're also radiologists, and there's
a lot of facets
we euthanize,
to it.
so we do lots that doctors don't do and they can't do. And so you have a huge responsibility. Euthanasia. I qualified at 22. I got into uni a year early.
Yeah.
Because of the nerdiness. But at 22 years old, you're putting pets to sleep. It's a huge responsibility to have those conversations with people, to operate.
Did you ever feel like it was too much?
No, I loved it. The only thing that was too much was dealing with, it was out of the comfort zone, but for a different reason, but dealing with the farm animals and dealing with the stables. Because you could drive up a stables driveway, and you just have all these horse owners expecting like the main vet who's been a horse vet for 30, 40 years. Yeah. And then they see this new graduate and they're like, because it's expensive to own a horse, expensive to own any animal. And if you're inexperienced and haven't even really got the vocabulary or the sort of, people can tell if you're confident around horses. And I just never really thought that anyone ever wanted me on their farm or stables, because they probably didn't. So I stuck with what I was comfortable with, which was dogs and cats. But I used to love operating. So I used to spend hours operating at the back on dogs and cats. That's
wild. And do they, just in terms of like a veterinary question, do they have similar anatomy, or do you need to like memorize the anatomies of all these different...
Yeah, I mean, every animal has a slightly different anatomy. One thing that always fascinates me, I do a lot of work sort of around the world, international voluntary animal rescue, and every time you open a dog, for example, it's just always the same, and I love that. Yeah, you can go thousands of miles around the globe, one incision, and it's exactly the same as back in brain. That's crazy. But yeah, every animal has its own anatomy. Dogs and cats are obviously fairly similar, but there are big differences. And then you've got birds, and you've got guinea pigs and rabbits and all the rest of it. And that's why being a vet takes 5 years. You have to do anatomy, physiology, biochemistry of all the animals. Then of course you've got to do pretty much the whole agriculture degree. Then you've got to do even like meat. You've got to do equine. You've got to do so many things. Pathology. It takes, and then in your holidays you've got to do work as well. So it's literally 5 years straight. Yeah.
You were at this mixed practice, then you went off to France.
Yeah.
And then, what made you come back, or what was the next step after?
Well, also the snow melted.
The snow melted, and then.
So you come back. Some people go and do the boats in on T, but that was quite a big deal. I came back because I was a vet, and everyone was like, "Really?" Yeah. And even during the season, you'd get kittens brought to you on the bar with conjunctivitis, and everything stopped. Yeah. So après-ski, packed bar, everything stopped just to sort of dab some kittens' eyes with cotton wool. Or sometimes...
Did the girls like that?
Or sometimes...
No comment.
And I didn't give the kittens conjunctivitis on purpose, just for that. Just to make this quite clear.
Okay.
Some dogs, you'd have lacerations on their feet from skiers.
Okay.
Because the dogs used to run around the slopes, pet dogs. So I used to get sort of steri strips or maybe the odd suture from the English doctor. Mm-hmm. Again, everything stopped. So there was some weird sort of coming together of my two careers as it was back then. But used to come back, locum vet, so temporary vet, used to do cover like a week or a weekend or 2 weeks or a month somewhere in the UK. Mm-hmm. And then, as I say, just before I came to Brighton, I was working in Cardiff at their emergency clinic, and I loved emergency surgery. Mm-hmm. So I used to work nights and weekends, cesareans, road accidents, twisted stomachs. Like, it was amazing because that was quite exhilarating. And I guess at the time, in my late 20s, I liked exhilarating things. Mm-hmm. And I could also recover. You could do a night shift and then do something the next day. Mm-hmm. Now, impossible. Yeah. And then I got headhunted to Brighton to do a weekend of work to cover the emergency clinic, literally the one just round the corner, weirdly. Mm-hmm. I just fell in love with the place. And then I did more work here. Mm-hmm. And then I set up a different emergency clinic just outside Brighton that looked after Brighton and the South Downs villages and towns, mm-hmm. which is now 20 years old. It's called the Priory Emergency Treatment Service, and it's thriving. So that's a nice legacy to leave. Mm-hmm. And then it becomes harder and harder to do night shifts mm-hmm. and weekend shifts as you get older. And now I do daytime vet in Rottingdean at the Muse Vets, which mm-hmm. is an independent practice just down in Rottingdean Village. So, yeah, and also all the campaigning stuff in the rest of the week.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So, you opened this emergency room. How did you go about that? Did you obviously saw that there was a need for it, and how did you take the steps to actually opening that?
First, I approached the guys in Kent Town mm-hmm. and said, look, I'm kind of a long-term temporary vet. Mm-hmm. Any chance I could become more of a managerial position or partner? Mm-hmm. And they said, absolutely no chance. I think they said, you're too immature. I mean, I have my decks upstairs. I was still DJing and running club night. This is too immature. You have no idea about business. I think we'll just keep the things as they are. And I was like, and I think at the same time, my dad had taken me to lunch in London. Said, you're coming up to you're around 30. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now is the time to start thinking about laying down some foundations.
Interesting.
And so I approached them. They said no. And then I thought maybe if I approached a pre-existing day clinic mm-hmm. on the outskirts of Brighton and convince them to become the third partner, because there was two partners already, mm-hmm. and run the emergency service. And they kind of said yes after a few meetings, and we had about 15 or 16 subscribing practices. Some of the ones that went to the Kent Town one switched immediately because they knew me. Yeah. And all of a sudden we had this quite busy emergency clinic, and then I started to write for the local newspaper, mm-hmm. a free, as in I didn't get paid, a column every week mm-hmm. About animals and pets in the Argus mm-hmm. for about 3 years, and kept all my columns and scrapbooks, the nerdiness again. And then I got an opportunity to go on to live TV, which was the Paul O'Grady show, which at the time was on Channel 4 and had about 5 million viewers, mm-hmm. tea time. And I got that because someone came to the practice and said they're looking for a new vet. Yeah. And I went up to London to the casting, took my scrapbook with all the things and said, look, I love educating and I love just explaining stuff to people and making things simple. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I got it, and I did about 6 seasons with Paul, who at the time obviously was a massive stand-up comedian, and Lily Savage. Mm-hmm. So again, ticking boxes, working with one of the most famous comedians in the country, mm-hmm. But still being able to do my vet stuff. And we mm-hmm. used to set each other up with jokes. And I had this pet clinic where I took him and the celebrity guests around. Yeah. And that made me a TV vet, although I didn't do that many in terms of exposure, mm-hmm. but it was enough to make me a TV vet, give me that label, mm-hmm. which then enabled me to be invited to judge sort of charity dog shows around the country and endorse stuff, and it put me on a level that was incredibly helpful eventually in terms of campaigning. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But yeah, they were always terrifying until about 2 minutes into a 6-minute segment. when you relaxed and you kind of enjoyed it.
Yeah.
There were times backstage where you have the studio audience and one of your comedy legend idols, and you're sort of going out there. And I always used to wear my full scrubs, which used to, again, became a bit of a brand, really.
Yeah.
And yeah, looking back, incredible. I mean, he sadly passed last year as one of the most popular entertainers in the UK. And he did the Battersea programme. He was iconic, still is. So to have worked with someone like that it was a huge privilege and honour. And he actually gave me the cover quote for my Lucy's Law book.
Amazing.
Which is quite rare, apparently, for him to endorse something that much.
Yeah.
And we always stayed friends. We always sort of bumped into each other at charity dues and stuff. And yeah, he kind of was responsible. Paul O'Grady was responsible for most of my life, adult life, in terms of how it panned out. Hell of a lot.
Did you, when you were initially asked or mentioned that there was an opening for the TV vet position on the show, was there any, like, obviously you want to educate people, but was there any part of you that was like, that's not for me?
No. It was a chance to be out of my comfort zone, but it was also a chance to educate. And I've always just wanted to teach people in not in a patronising way. It just, I love explaining stuff to people and empowering them with the tools to make the correct decisions to be responsible pet owners. Not telling people what to do, just saying it's probably a good idea if you consider doing this, and then people are more likely to do it. Sounds a bit manipulative, but it's only to improve animal welfare.
Exactly.
And as I say, benefit responsible pet ownership. But to work with Paul, one of the kindest, cleverest, funniest people I've ever been around, let alone had the privilege of working with, that really was the perfect environment to then educate the public and how to look after their pets.
And during that time, the 6 seasons that you were on the show, what was your fondest memory?
Oh my God, all of them. I mean, once there was like World Penguin Day, so I had to feed penguins the studio with Graham Norton and Paul O'Grady, which was just mad. I mean, it was the beginning, I think, of mad situations that I found myself in.
Yeah, 100%.
That I sort of, and even working in the bar in France, because it was such a cool bar. Zoe and Norman, when they were together, they used to come on holiday. Damien Hirst, the French football team, Bob Sinclair played next to me once.
That's crazy.
So I, amongst all the other craziness and chaos, there were these sort of moments of, how's this happened? Remember the Pet Shop Boys once were guests. I was a big fan. I started to meet people that I would never have met otherwise, that were kind of idols, and that was exciting. Because again, growing up as someone very, very shy and introvert, I never thought I'd ever meet people who I sort of looked up to or bought records of, or were my heroes. And that continued. I mean, obviously Paul O'Grady, but working with people like Ricky Gervais just blows your mind. And you're not like just meeting or getting a selfie, you're literally campaighning with, you're meeting with.
Like you're building a relationship with these people.
Yeah, I mean, I've known Ricky now for like 11, 12 years. We don't hang out all the time, but occasionally we'll meet each other, or I can ask him to share stuff on socials. And it's amazing, I mean, more than amazing, to have these people in your life that can accelerate your campaigning messaging, elevate, spread, distribute, whatever you want to call it, and also endorse. It's not just about the number of people they can reach, it's the endorsement of these people. You can have a celebrity with no followers on socials, but it's the fact that they endorse your campaign. It creates a bit of a fear of missing out for other celebrities as well and other supporters. So yeah, it's been a fascinating few years.
It really has. So, because obviously, as people know, you've done some amazing campaign that has, changed the entire game of animal welfare. And what was the starting point of that? Like, obviously you had this immense care for animals, but at what point did it switch where you were like, no, I have to take control of this now?
when I was on a night shift in 2009 in my emergency clinic that I ran in Patcham, just outside Brighton, and 8 puppies came in with 8 different owners from 8 different subscribing vet practices around. And they all had a disease called parvovirus, and they all were kind of Jack Russell crosses. And this is a bit suspicious. Now, anyone who has a dog or knows about parvo knows that it's probably the most horrific disease dogs can get, puppies can get, and it's usually from environments of poor husbandry, irresponsible breeding, puppy farming, for example, where bitches aren't vaccinated, puppies aren't vaccinated, so they pick up this disease, which is everywhere. And it's one of the reasons we give vaccinations to puppies. And it rips through them, it makes them vomit, diarrhea. Apologies if you're eating your dinner or your breakfast, and it's incredibly painful, incredibly sad, very hard to treat, very expensive to treat. They usually die. Unless you catch them early. Luckily, these guys all came in early. I think we saved 6. We lost 2, sadly. So not only are these new owners sort of absolutely distraught because these puppies that they've bought are now dying, but the kids are upset. They've had to now disinfect their houses. The vet bills are huge because you have to do barrier nursing, and the drugs that you use are expensive. So it was a nightmare, and it was an injustice I felt that just really didn't sit well with me. So I then went undercover and found where they were being sold, which was a stable block just outside Brighton, and it was legal. So it was a legal, you could call it a legal third-party commercial puppy dealer, and they had a pet sales license, legal. And I found out because I was peeling stickers off the vaccination certificates they were giving out, that they were buying these puppies in from puppy farms, which are large-scale commercial dog breeding units, often in rural areas, that provide that prioritise profit over welfare. Battery farms for dogs, basically, in the dark, and who sell their puppies remotely via these third-party dealers. So you never see the mum. And I just thought, this isn't right. But the whole chain was legal. The whole pipeline was legal. And at the time, the government advice was always see puppy interacting with his or her mum in the place they were born. But the government was also issuing licenses to sell the pups remotely from third-party dealers like the stable block. So it's like the government is essentially warning against its own licensing system. And this, again, was like hypocrisy from the top. And I just started to think, right, I can maybe change this. And I can educate people. That would be the first way. And because I was a TV vet that was going around the country judging dog shows, I thought, if I get celebrities to judge the dog shows, they'll put in the media, help raise awareness about the correct way to choose a dog, which is to either go to a responsible breeder and see the puppy interacting with his or her mum, place they were born, or consider rescue. But there's, if you don't go to a third-party dealer, you're not going to be complicit in this cruelty. And obviously puppy farms are places that are out they're hundreds of miles away from sort of the beaten track. The breeding dogs and the stud dogs kept horrifically, they have mammary tumours, womb infections, infectious disease, they're inbred, the surgical disease, behavioural disease, cause financial issues when these poor dogs are bought and have issues. So I thought if people could only rescue or buy responsibly, that would end the industry. So I started a dog show called the World's Biggest Puppy Party, and I called it that to get people in through the doors. It didn't really work, and I lost a fortune because I didn't know what I was doing, and it was at the racecourse in Brighton, which as an animal welfare event venue it's pretty extreme. I'm obviously not into my horse racing, but it was a venue that was available, and I cobbled it together. And we had stands, and we had food, and we had live music, and we had the paddock, which was a fantastic dog show ring, and we had local celebrities that were judging it. We had someone from the Bill, and we had a very famous boxer called Michael Watson. Who was famously brain damaged by Chris Eubank, but he judged best boxer dog. And people drove for miles and brought their boxer dogs just for him to sort of touch. He wasn't really physically capable of sort of walking around the dog show ring, but he was there.
Yeah.
Caroline Lucas was there, who at the time was a European MP. We had someone from EastEnders. So all of a sudden there was well-known, high-profile personalities judging the dog show, and then in the middle of the dog show we had this parade of ex-rescued breeding puppy farm dogs, and everyone started crying, and it was quiet, and this was almost like the presenting of the evidence. And even though I lost a fortune that year in terms of financial, because I had to buy cheap carpet to put down in the stand in case the dogs peed. There was so much stuff and we had a bit of sponsorship, but it never covered all of it. But I knew that there was something in that day, and then the next year I hooked up with a couple of friends who, one was the events officer for Stand the House, Rebecca, and then my other friend Stuart, who was a sort of expert in health and safety and the boring stuff. And we formed a community interest company called Pup Aid as a nod to Live Aid, and we did it in the back garden of Stand the House for 2 years. And the calibre of celebrity got higher, and we had Rizzle Kicks, who were massive back then. Patsy Palmer was huge in EastEnders, and she judged, I think, best red setter because she's ginger. There was this chocolate shop in Brighton at the time called Chucky Wucky Doodah. They judged best chocolate Labrador.
Love it.
So we tweaked everything to the celebrity. And then Meg Matthews at the time, who was Noel Gallagher's ex, she had a little Boston Terrier called Oscar, who was from a puppy farm. And she came down and got involved and said, at the same time, we both agreed, because I was from North West London, and so was she, that Primrose Hill would be the best place to get even more celebrities. So we moved the dog show to Primrose Hill every September for the next 7 years. Ricky Gervais came, Sarah Harding, Brian May, Elle Macpherson. I mean, it was nuts for 7 years. We had so many celebrities that used to come. Paparazzi, all the Love Island, Made in Chelsea.
Oh my God.
It was all, anyways, Essex. So it was all like Rachel Riley, Sue Perkins. It was a whole spectrum of demographics that would influence people, from the reality stars to the sort of the highbrow to people like Ricky. And my vision was really to educate the masses and use these celebrities as the inspiring sort of key opinion leaders, if you like, that were sending out the messages of, hey, come to the dog show, but if you are looking for a dog, please choose responsibly, rescue or breeder. And we did that for a few years, and then which was very successful in terms of paparazzi and raising awareness, but it was kind of the only peak in the year, if you like. And for me, it wasn't good enough. And I was also doing online campaigns like #Where'sMum to encourage people to always ask where's mum. And then Caroline Lucas invited me, who's just stepped down, but she was obviously the Brighton Green MP for many years. She invited me to Westminster because I'd given her family advice about which dog to get. And they decided on a rescued Labrador. And she said, come up to Westminster and discuss your campaign. And she told me to do an e-petition, which I did, first ever e-petition. So government e-petitions, if you get 100,000, they get debated usually. So I did that and got 100,000. I started lobbying. I started going to Westminster. I was completely out of my comfort zone and imposter syndrome. But I did. I've gone to Westminster about 300 times in 6 years, every day off from work. And then went through every single political tool. So e-petitions, we lost that first debate, uncovered all the sort of dark forces behind the scenes that were stopping us making progress. Going again, select committee, going again, another debate, another petition. Eventually your meetings start moving from Palace of Westminster, Portcullis House, to number 10. And then 10 years after I saw those first puppies coming in, being sold by a third-party dealer, which were dying of parvovirus, we banned third-party dealers. So with that, we made all breeders accountable, because by default, the seller and the breeder have to be the same person. We changed it in England, then we changed it in Wales, and then we changed it in Scotland. And I've just come back from Northern Ireland, so that's on the way to be changed as well. So, and that also not only bans third-party dealers in Northern Ireland, but it really compromises the flow of puppies from the Republic of Ireland through Northern Ireland to the British mainland. So it kind of seals off the UK in terms of making all breeders accountable. And that whole journey, which took, 10 years to get the English law over the line, and then slightly more to get Scotland and Wales and obviously Northern Ireland. So we're at 15 years after those first puppies. But it just shows what one event, I mean, if I wasn't on duty that night, would any of this ever happen?
So crazy to think about.
Yeah, it just shows that things happen for a reason, and sometimes you've just got to go with it, and you've got to follow your gut instinct. And if there's an injustice that sits really uncomfortable with you, you have to follow it up. And if you care enough about righting that injustice, you automatically kind of become a campaigner. And there are so many ways that you can affect change and be part of the solution. That's why I wrote that other book, Be More Mosquito, because during my journey, I didn't want anyone to waste their resources. When you're a grassroots campaigner, you're always doing something else as well as campaigning. Otherwise, you're a political campaigner or a lobbyist, and you're paid. So I was always conscious that I didn't want anyone else to go through what I went through and just waste their time. There's so many shortcuts and streamlined ways of doing stuff. And now I guess you could call me a seasoned campaigner, or even a seasoned professional campaigner, although I don't get paid for it. But it's something that you do learn and you get much better at, because you understand the whole parliamentary process and protocol, what's possible, what isn't, timescales, the long game, relationships with MPs, ministers, prime ministers. And it's bizarre because, I mean, it's kind of a theme of what we're talking about, to go from being such a quiet little boy to working with Ricky Gervais, prime ministers, MPs, not just in this country but all around the world in different parliaments. It's nuts, and I think it just shows what can happen if you do put yourself out there, and if you do care enough about stuff that you want to be part of the solution, not someone who blames or can't be bothered or thinks just someone else will do it. We can all do something.
Was that kind of the mindset that pushed you through those 6 years of campaigning? Was it just that this is something that I'm so passionate about that it's going to happen?
Yeah, I think once you start, and you almost know, you start knowing too much to stop. You can't pass it on to anyone. I always say it's a bit like, there's sort of box sets that they burst into the serial killer's back room, and there's pictures and there's string and there's newspaper articles. That's a campaigning brain. All the MPs, especially their names of their pets, what they've said in various debates, and it's all pieced together in your brain with pieces of string, so you can't pass that on. So you've almost gone past the point of, you have to see it through. And then of course you kind of realise that if you don't do it, no one else is going to do it. And so Lucy's Law was what we called the ban on third-party commercial puppy and kitten dealers. This is the actual original campaign rosette. Pink because it was Lucy's favourite colour.
Here, we'll show it over here.
Lucy was a Cavalier King Charles Spaniel, rescued from a legal licensed puppy farm in Wales. And that was a design I designed that. It was almost channeling my dad's logo.
A little nod to him.
What's that?
A little nod to him.
There's many nods. And so the Mirror newspaper became our media partner. So they kind of did it professionally. But I remember drawing it immediately and giving it to them, and it came back within the same day. And it was like, you've absolutely nailed it. And that was Lisa's favourite picture of Lucy. Lisa was Lucy's saviour, really. She rescued and rehabilitated her. And then Lucy's Law as a hashtag, as a great alliteration, the way the text is stacked. And that became the brand, really. And for years we were unsuccessful with the campaigning because we were being blocked by not just the government, but we were also being blocked by the pet industry, who believed that if you ban puppies and kittens from third-party sellers like pet shops, pet stores, it will lead to a ban on all animals in pet stores, which would be great, but it would be a disaster for some of these huge chains around the country that sell rabbits and guinea pigs, etc. So we were blocked by them. We were being blocked by some of the big charities in the UK who had commercial partnerships with the pet industry.
Interesting.
So that was uncomfortable, and especially when we uncovered, because on the public-facing comms, they were all supportive of us, but behind the scenes they were blocking.
Oh my gosh.
So that needed to be uncovered very carefully and very carefully, which we did by setting up an all-party parliamentary group for dog welfare, and then inviting them in to give evidence, and then revealing that they had actually blocked, and they didn't know that I knew that.
And how did
That's
they
in 2017.
respond to that?
Well, they were shell-shocked, and the power then went immediately to the campaigners. And also I'd filled the room with journalists, so the press just outed them all.
Oh my God.
That was in 2017. Then I came up with Lucy's Law as a rebrand for the campaign, and it completely just took off, because it had a backstory, it had a face, it had so much to it, this brand.
Like, you can't turn your head from that.
Yeah. And we had lots of celebrity support, and it was another petition we did. We did two Lucy's Law petitions, had the debate, kind of won the debate. And then from that, other stuff happened. So you've got this all-party parliamentary group for dog welfare. That was the only reason for setting it up. And now we still run it. I still run it as secretariat and co-founder. 7 years later, and we have meetings in Westminster every few months, and we have topics we discuss like greyhound racing, or the state of UK rescue, the relationship between domestic violence, animal abuse, assistance dogs and accessibility. And I find now my life and campaigning work is not just about animal welfare, it's about human welfare, it's about mental health, and it's about bringing those two worlds together. And it's amazing how pets can benefit. I mean, it's not amazing how pets can benefit humans, we know that because we have pets, but in terms of mental health and in terms of tackling loneliness, for example, ambassador of Together Co, which is a loneliness charity in Brighton, and we've matched them up with the RSPCA, so to combat loneliness by adoption and fostering. So there's so much that we can do in bringing different sectors together. Collaboration is one thing I push all the time. Charities working together, sectors working together, and cross-party MPs working together. And it's amazing what you can achieve if you just sort of lower your barriers a little bit and realise that we all want the same thing. And it's a lot quicker to get there if we just admit that working together is beneficial for the whole picture, animals, people, society in general.
Wow. I'm just very inspired by just this entire story, because you had to obviously give up so much of your life in some way to make this happen. Like, you sacrificed a lot.
Yeah, I think I'd say I'd sacrificed 20 years to commit, to give a decent amount of time to commit to make all this stuff happen. Because, I talk about Ricky Gervais, and I talk about, working with prime ministers and stuff, but that's about 2% of the whole story. So about 98% is incredibly lonely. It can be very depressing, unbelievably time consuming, takes up a lot of your time, especially on weekends, evenings, when you're a grassroots campaigner, which is why I wrote that Be More Mosquito book, because I didn't want people to have to go through that and waste their time. Although you kind of learn from that as you go, how to streamline stuff. But yeah, I've sacrificed a lot, but I wouldn't change anything, because it's just been a phenomenal journey.
And were you practicing like veterinary medicine during this time?
Funny enough, during lockdown and between sort of 2018 and last year, so 2023, I wasn't because there was no practices in Brighton that weren't corporate.
Interesting.
And corporately owned by big chains, and I refuse on principle to work for corporate vets.
What's the difference?
One is, so I work for an independent now, because there's a corporate branch in Rottingdean that was flipped to an independent, and I just believe that you can give a more personal service. You can give more what's called contextualized care now, rather than being scrutinized by hedge funds or venture capitalists that are kind of using vets now as pawns and making them charge and making them offer blood tests or further diagnostics when they're not, in my opinion, always necessary. And I go back to a very old school type of being a vet, which is almost like symptomatic treatment. You treat what's in front of you, and if it doesn't get better, it comes back, rather than do a blood test, ultrasound, x-ray, charge the owner a fortune whether they're insured or not. I'm more give an anti-inflammatory, give an antibiotic, call me later, call me tomorrow, email me. Let's keep talking and get your pet together, better together.
Yes, yeah.
So it's a different culture, and also I genuinely believe independent vets like us are more likely to go into the community, do the school visits, write the newspaper columns, judge the fun little village dog shows, help local charities, because I see caring for animals, caring for humans via animals, much more holistic than just what goes on in your consulting room. And I think if you're looking after animals in the community, you're looking after humans in your community, and you're more likely to sort of go beyond the walls of your veterinary clinic. And I certainly do that, and I love doing it because I think it's important. So I'll teach. So I think obviously caring for animals in the practice is important, but I go to do school visits every week, every fortnight, teach kids how to look after animals, respect each other, talk about mental health of humans as well. It's a really nice vehicle to talk about that. And I kind of try and do as much as I can with the resources I have to make my community a better place for animals and humans. And I love it. It's not like it's a chore. I think we should all be doing something to help each other, because I think it helps ourselves.
When you do like the visits to schools and that sort of thing, do you view it as like a hobby, or how do you view it? Do you view it as like a career, part of your career?
I just think it's just a nice, fun thing to do. I don't know. It's a good question. I think it's something that I just know I should be doing. It's not even a decision. It's like I just have to. It's almost like you offset all the stuff all the fun stuff you do in your like social life. I think it's important to offset it with stuff that makes your community, society, sometimes even country better. So it just feels like the right thing to do. Yeah, and I enjoy it, and you learn stuff every time. You get better at it every time. I mean, I've been doing school visits for 20 years, but it's really fun, and you can see the kids' minds sort of coming up with stuff that challenging them. You know, we talk about like summer problems with dogs when they walk on the pavement with their hot paws, eating animals, flat-faced dogs. We can talk, depending on the age, you can talk about euthanasia with kids, and it's stuff that they've never been talked or challenged about before. But you're definitely, as I said before, you're empowering them with the tools to maybe take that decision home with them, conversation home with them, and chat with their parents or whoever looks after them, or their friends or their teachers or their peers. And you're kind of just giving them the seeds of inspiration, I suppose, without sounding too like, oh, look at me. But it's important, I think, for kids to, and I think sometimes if a different person comes into the school, i.e. not a teacher or a parent, they're either more inclined to learn because it's and I wear my scrub top and I have my stethoscope, and it's a bit like I'm a character. Yeah. And we get through a lot of stuff. I mean, I spoke in Rottingdean recently. I spoke to the class, year one of St Margaret's, so they're 4 or 5 years old, for an hour and a half.
Yeah,
and it's only because there was a break time that we had to stop. And then they all came to the practice a few weeks later with their little high vis and holding hands. And we did a whole thing about a dog that had eaten a stone. So the x-ray and theatre was set up for the surgery. And and we got this amazing thank you card back with all notes written on how much they enjoyed it and how much they learned from it. Yeah. You just think, hopefully that's made a huge difference to those kids' lives. Maybe they'll become vets, or they'll become vet nurses, or they'll consider a career helping animals or helping people, or just being empaths, or vocational people. So yeah, I try and do as much as possible. As I say, I enjoy doing it.
Do you ever see yourself in any of the kids that you teach?
Yeah, of course. All the little nerdy ones at the front. Yeah, I know.
With their hands up, just so eager.
It's like, I have to ask someone else. I'm sorry, but I know you know the answer.
I know.
But we have so much fun. The kids nowadays, even the nerdy ones, are so much more switched on and streetwise than we ever were, because of what they're exposed to. So you have some fantastic conversations. The mental health thing, I think, is fascinating, because we talk about symptoms and how to recognise signs of illness in animals, then signs of illness with each other, and someone always coughs at that point. It's like, yeah,
that's the one.
You've got it, that's one. And then I say, what about invisible illnesses with people? And they'll say cancer, and they'll say an infection, and I'll say, no, above the sort of neck. I think someone said earache. And eventually we'll get to mental health. And I said the other day, which was Woodingdean Primary, I said, what's mental health mean to you? And this was year 2, so 5-year-olds. And one girl put her hand up and she said, being careful with your words. And it just stunned me. And she got the prize for, I think they call it the secret sitter. And it's just incredible how these minds are working while you're chatting with them. So, and you don't have to be a vet, you don't have to work with animals. I think everyone has a duty, especially if they do something interesting, to help mould those young minds, to help them cope and deal with being older and eventually being an adult.
Yeah, and even just with myself being in schools and teaching kids, there are so many things that kids tell me, and I can just imagine if they had an experience like you coming in and teaching them about all these things, it could really change their lives.
Yeah. And I went to the school that you teach in last year, and they were fantastic. I think I spoke to about 3 classes. And
it's a really interesting experience that you are able to give yourself in such a full way. Do you ever feel like your work-life balance? Like, when you speak, I just feel like this is so overwhelming. Like, how do you balance it all?
I think you have to do. I mean, I'm in a fortunate position now because I don't have to work as much. I've just finished filming a documentary, which was fairly well paid, and it meant that I didn't have to work as much as doing a vet. So I only work part-time as a vet, but I try and balance the rest of the week with just as much work. It's just not paid. So the school visits, the Westminster stuff, whether that's on Zoom or actually in Westminster, it's usually a mixture. Sometimes I've got the odd corporate endorsement, like a dog food or dog beds. But as you say, it's all about the balance. And I think you have to eventually come to terms with what you can actually do without compromising your own physical and mental health. So I'll work full on Monday to Friday. I'll try not to work weekends now. I used to work every weekend, either campaigning or vetting. And I remember back then thinking that one day I'm just going to have weekends off like a normal person. And I also remember when I'd finished the law changing thing, the bulk of it, and starting to sort of watch telly in the evening, feeling really guilty that, hang on a minute, I should be doing something. And that took years to go. But I do fill my weeks with the campaigning, with the school visits, with being a vet, filming some stuff, chatting with lovely people like yourself, sharing my story in a way that hopefully inspires others to think, oh, actually, that doesn't sit right with me. I can do something about it. And even if you have no campaigning experience, you can still do something. So yeah, and as you know, I every 5 o'clock every day I have to have my pot of tea with my friend Nick.
Your tiffin.
And I think that's also important because, you know, I think isolation these days can be incredibly detrimental. and when you only work part-time, it's very important to have a routine. So the football for me, going to watch Brighton and Hove Albion, especially at home, sometimes we go to away games, is unbelievably important. And it's not just about going to watch football, it's about meeting the people who sit all around you. It's about something in your calendar that isn't really going to change. It's there to look forward to. And I think again, you're filling your life with a kind of a routine that isn't necessarily work related, but it's things that you're constantly looking forward to, and then you're filling in the gaps around to make the community, the country, the world a better place with various campaigns and meetings and sort of facilitating collaboration. I'd say is a lot of what I do now. Someone will come, I get a lot of emails saying, can you help me with this? Can you sort this out? Not even just animal welfare, all sorts of things. And I'll say, you need to speak to that person. And I love doing an email intro. I'm not a control freak that goes, I have to be involved with this. You need to talk to each other. I can't wait to see what you get up to, play nicely. And that I do a lot. And I like doing that. And then, the events in Westminster, they take a lot of planning, a lot of time. And that's talking to sort of 200 people in the Palace of Westminster in these beautiful rooms, bringing speakers together, chairing the meeting. I'm sitting there chairing a meeting. And, if someone said to my tiny little Marc self, the one who's just about to get carried away by those parrots, that in, 40 odd years' time, you're going to be chairing a meeting in the biggest committee room in the Palace of Westminster, sitting in Winston Churchill's chair and making progress to change more laws for animals and potentially people. Be like, I don't know what any of those words even mean. So it's been a huge, especially someone who was never into politics or history or law, to now be at the forefront and the cutting edge of all those things, as well as doing what I always wanted to do, is, it's... I still have to pinch myself. And it does often feel like it was someone else that was doing the campaigning all those years, because it was so surreal and so full on. But we came out the other end. And happy to sort of now share all the good stuff to help other people.
It's just crazy when you put it that way, that this is it's wild. Obviously, all these accomplishments was a step-by-step, slow growth to where you are today. But it's just insane that when you look back at it, all you've accomplished, and I'm just kind of speechless. It's quite interesting.
It's quite good. I mean, I brought this along because this is quite fun. Yeah. This looks like just a normal Christmas card, but the backstory is quite interesting. Obviously, I'm into my rescue dogs and promoting rescue, and there was a rumour going around number 10 in about 2018 that they were Boris and Carrie. Carrie was Boris's girlfriend at the time. Now they're obviously married, 3 kids. They were looking for a rescue dog, and all the big charities that were kind of blocking me started to put press releases out. These are the candidates. People, they should adopt from us. And I messaged Carrie because I knew her from campaigning, and I said, "Look, can we have a chat?" So she said, "Yeah, come to 10 Downing Street tomorrow. I'll pick you up at the foyer at 4:00. And that was normal back then, because I was in Downing Street, I don't know, 50, 60 meetings. So we went up to the private flat where they lived, and they just moved in because he'd only just become Prime Minister. So now I'm in the Prime Minister's house, which is kind of in number 11, and it's massive. They call it the flat. It's massive. It's like a 3-story mansion within number 11, which with an adjoining door to number 10.
Oh my gosh.
And I didn't have to give my phone in. Normally you have to give your phone in. In number 10. As soon as you walk in, there's this big rack that you put your phone in. And I was a private guest, so I didn't have to. So now I'm in so Carrie was like, this is mad, we've just moved in. She goes, do you want a tour?
Oh my gosh.
Obviously. So we go up to the bedroom at the top. And Boris's pants are all over the floor.
Oh my god.
I've still got my phone on me.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, tempting. But it'll probably ruin that relationship if I start taking pictures of his pants. So we have this tour of the place, then we had this chat. I was there for 2 hours. And I said, look, instead of the big charities or even the mid-sized charities, please could you consider adopting from Friends of Animals Wales, which only deal with ex-breeding dogs that are going to be shot, usually, because they're infertile, or puppies that are going to be drowned because they have a problem.
Oh, God.
Why
such brutal ways?
Because they're the puppy farms that the public never see. So she said, yeah. So I hooked her up by email with Elaine, who runs the charity, which I'm a very proud patron of. And didn't hear anything for about 10 days. And then it was a holiday in Spain on the beach with a load of friends getting drunk, just arrived in Malaga. And my mobile rang, and it was a number that I didn't recognise. And I normally, 99% of the time, don't answer phones that I think we're all the same, right? And I was drunk, so I did. And this voice said, hello. And I was like, hello? Is that Marc? And I was like, yeah. He goes, it's Boris here.
Oh my
I'm with
God.
Carrie, and we've decided on Dylan.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa, okay. And so obviously put him on speakerphone immediately.
Yeah.
And everyone was like, and we had this 20-minute conversation, which I don't remember, because I drank too much San Miguel and sangria and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
And then 2 weeks later, we did the handover. So I was walking up Downing Street with this puppy that had just come in from Wales with the charity guys. And as I walked up to knock on the door of number 10, all the paparazzi, because they'd all had the heads up, it was in the Mail on Sunday and it was on the Telegraph that day, that there was this new cabinet member joining the team.
Oh my goodness.
And it was little 9-week-old Dylan.
Oh.
And I had to turn the basket round because Dylan was looking the wrong way, and of course then he was poking his head out, and everyone was like, tap, 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 tap. Went upstairs, and then we had this sort of run around the garden photo call, and I had loads of these with me at the time, and everyone was wearing them except Boris, including Dylan was wearing one. And I went up to Boris, and he was the Prime Minister, and I went up to him quietly and said, Boris, would you mind putting this on? He went, absolutely, no problem. And for a grassroots campaigner that started the campaign, designed the logo, and was there from the right at that first second to the Prime Minister wearing your Grassroots campaign rosette and having changed the law, that was probably one of the most special moments I've ever experienced. Quite overwhelming. And then, of course, when we did change the law, they gave us a garden party at number 10, and we're allowed to invite anyone. So I had so from the nerdiest of losers, to having the guest list for a garden party at number 10.
It's just
so Brian May came, and it was. But the most important beings that came, were ex-rescue puppy farm dogs from Wales, who are now not only running around number 10 garden having the best life, living the best life, but also number 10 kitchen had baked them bone-shaped biscuits.
That's so cute.
Which was, and then on the way out, we had this whole Downing Street full of all the guests, 120 guests, and I gave a speech. So again, from shy, introvert, blah, 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 to now speaking on the steps of number 10 in Downing Street to 120 people, impromptu, holding a dog, and apparently the Prime Minister is the only person who's allowed to speak from those steps. But because I'd started, apparently the security guys were like, just let him go, let him go. I was, talked for about, I don't know, a couple of minutes. But all these moments are, I look back and it's mad that you can just tick all these things off that have been achieved. Never ever taken anything for granted. But yeah, hugely inspired by my dad, obviously, and my grandma, who escaped the Holocaust on kinder transport, and she taught me that anything's possible and to never give up. And that's always been my sort of mantra in the back of my head, even in the dark days of campaigning. My point about this was, that's Dylan.
Aww, there's Dylan.
And that was the number 10 Christmas card that year. So yeah, it just shows that, I don't know, just again, sort of when I said to Carrie, can we have that conversation? It leads to them adopting, in terms of things I'm most proud of, definitely one of them is getting a rescue dog and raising the profile of rescue dogs and getting the rescue dog into number 10. It's huge. Because a few years before, Obama got Portuguese water dogs, puppies, gifted to him. And I remember thinking, what an opportunity missed. And campaigning is all about not missing opportunities. And to get not only to get a rescue dog into number 10, but for him to make it, for him to be that valued that he makes it onto their Christmas card was quite
pretty
a big
wild.
deal. Yeah, and it's got obviously their signatures in, but also a little paw print of
little Dylan.
Yeah, so that was a huge moment. So yeah, it's all good.
That's just wild, and you can just see like how much a dog can mean to someone's life.
Yeah, and do you know what, like him or not, Boris was a huge personality, will always be. But when he was seen in the news or going around Westminster, going jogging, he always had little Dylan with him. And it's just another thing that's happened that you just think, wow, that's so surreal.
It really is, and it's crazy to think that all these opportunities have come from just
that one night on call.
The one night, and just being open. Like you exude. You can see the passion, first of all, and the positivity in terms of like anything can happen. And I think it's a great lesson for people to always remember that these things don't happen overnight. It's like every day you need to be working towards your goal. And it's just really inspirational.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of your questions about, use the word failure, and it's such an interesting word because failure can mean something to you personally, but in my experience, the word failure can be replaced by opportunities. Usually stuff doesn't happen if it's not meant to happen, but from that you can learn so much about maybe why it didn't happen, but also it can change the course to do something a lot better that was meant to be. So the word failure really is actually an opportunity to learn something that you probably weren't aware of before. So yeah, it's been a huge learning curve, and it still is, and it always will be. And I think that's the way to look at everything. You can never become complacent and assume stuff's going to happen. A good example is there's a piece of legislation called the Kept Animals Bill, which had 5 pieces of legislation within it, banning live exports of sheep and cattle. Pet theft reform, stealing a pet a specific offence, banning primates as pets, banning the import of dogs with cropped ears, and banning puppies under 6 months from being imported. And that was a huge piece of legislation. Everyone was excited. It was driven by campaigners and campaigning charities, and it was dropped by the government. And then it came back up in what's called private members' bills. So each of those pieces of legislation then had their own little journey. And then the Prime Minister calls a snap election. So especially with politics, you just never know what's going to happen. So banning live exports of sheep and cattle, that's happened. That crossed the line. It's become law. Pet theft reform. So stealing a pet has become a specific offence. However, puppy smuggling and banning of the import of puppies under 6 months, banning the import of dogs with cropped ears, it hadn't made enough progress to be rushed through. So that now has to start again in the next government with a new MP. And that's, I think, the main frustration of especially political campaigning. It takes so long. And it takes long because it has to take long. It has to be scrutinised, especially primary legislation. It has to pass through the House of Commons and Lords. When you think about the lifespan of an animal, especially an animal that's been exploited, abused, cruelly treated, 5 years, 6 years, 10 years is probably longer than its lifespan. And I think as an animal lover, that's always in the back of your mind because you're almost like representing animals. You're like their manager. So when something bad happens to delay a law, for example, such as delaying a law, you're immediately thinking that's a whole animal's life that it's going to be exploited and abused and cruelly treated for another 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. Because every law you're trying to get passed is a law to protect animals, and if you can't protect them, they're left vulnerable and exposed. And that's, for me, that's probably the biggest frustration I have is having to wait until laws that are pretty much common sense are agreed and passed and then implemented and then enforced. It's all well and good passing a law, but then it needs to be enforced. So there's so many moving parts with regard to political campaigning. And the election, again, as I say, sort of laws have to start from scratch, petitions start from scratch, the select committees, the APPGs, there's all the cogs and the wheels and the levers of Westminster or any parliament around the world have to then start from scratch. And that delay, especially when you're trying to protect the most vulnerable, and not just animals, disabled, old people, children, those delays, I think, cause so much harm. But there's kind of nothing we can do about it. Apart from raise awareness and change public behaviour, because that can often change stuff without legislation. But obviously the combination is much more impactful.
And how do you deal with this sadness that comes with everything that, like all the knowledge that you have prior to this campaign being passed? How did you deal with the just complete sadness that something wasn't changing immediately?
I think because you do develop a default setting, and I think knowing that you're part of the solution is the only band-aid plaster you can put on that wound, and knowing that it will get better eventually, and that you're doing something about it, and you're sharing, raising awareness. I mean, I get sent a lot of stuff on social media. Can you help? Can you sort this out? Can you please fix this? And you can't. You have to admit also that you can't. But if you share it or you send it to someone that probably can, you're again part of that solution. I think if you do nothing, you're complicit. So it is overwhelming, and I have cultivated this position of being a kind of a fixer, a facilitator, which is a huge honour. But it does take its toll, and I think that's why walking on the South Downs, swimming in the sea, going to the Amex, having my 5 o'clock cup of tea with Nick is the offset.
Yeah, it grounds you.
You kind of need it. Definitely.
So you said that obviously we've discussed about some of your specific accomplishments. You mentioned when Boris put the pin on him. Is there anything that really stands out as something that you hope to be remembered for?
I think as a campaigner who did good stuff for both animals and now humans, that's fine for me. And whether that's the school visits or the parliamentary stuff or just making a dog better in my consulting room, I don't care. It's nice just to have make a positive contribution to society. I guess my proudest thing, obviously getting a rescue dog into number 10, passing Lucy's law, is this thing.
And what's that thing?
Which is my medal.
Oh my gosh, look at that.
Cheeky little medal.
Cheeky little medal.
So that's an OBE, and very few people get them, and basically it's an honour that the King or the Queen gives out. This was actually, I was on the Queen's birthday honours list in 2021. So in this country, there's an honours system. So every New Year and every June, they give out medals. They give out OBs, MBs and CBs, and they give out knighthoods. And it's basically a recognition of good work. So I was on the Queen's penultimate birthday honours list in 2021, and then when I was due to receive it in 2022, she was starting to get frail. So Prince Charles gave me that, and then obviously became king. So I've got a lovely combination of a certificate at home signed by the Queen and the picture with the king. And that's, again, it's David Beckham's got an OBE, they are very, very, Marcus Rashford got an MBE. They're very, very few and far between. But to be recognised by the monarchy for something that I just love doing, which is trying to help animals, which is what I did with the tortoise and the maggot, or hanging out with the macaws. I've never really changed my feelings for wanting to help animals, but the higher the profile goes and the more people I work with, Ricky Gervais and Boris and all the rest of it, now the King and the Queen, it's mad. So I'm incredibly proud of all this stuff, but everything is underpinned by just wanting to help animals and protect the animals and make their lives better, which is now turned into humans as well. Yeah.
That's incredible. And I suppose, because obviously you're such a, you're how shall I put this? As a leader for change in the field of animal welfare, what attributes do you think are essential for people to possess in order to make change themselves? Like if they are wanting to go out and make change?
Yeah, I get asked this a lot, and it's a phenomenal question. First of all, you've got to want to do it.
Yeah.
There's no point going, that's bad, needs to change, and then stopping. You have to care enough about something to want to change it. That's fundamental. The second thing is you need to provide the solution. There's no point going, that's bad, that's right, boo. What would you do instead then? I don't know.
Yeah.
And that solution has to be a solution that's practical and legislative and possible. So I think if you're political campaigning, you need to have a solicitor or a barrister or someone that understands the law that can say, right, we're aiming for that, like banning third-party sales. You need to be creative, you need to have an imagination, you need to definitely think outside the box, you need to be someone that is very good at, or becomes very good at, relationship building with the public, with stakeholding, say charities, with MPs especially, ministers, celebrities. And you need to be prepared for the long game. My dad played a lot of chess with me when I was young, and I'm convinced that was a huge help. But I always say I always talk about the ambush, because at the end of the day, you've got to surround the person who decides on whether your thing happens or not with the evidence and with people that are basically all saying the same thing. Consensus of what I call stakeholders. So stakeholders are like the main charities, say, in that sector. So if you have consensus with the main charities, organisations, you have celebrities that are cool and relevant, not dodgy ones. You have a petition, that's the public, for example, saying we all want this, 100,000. And you have cross-party MPs. So you're basically setting up this sort of ambush of all different types of people. I felt it weirdly. I went to Rome a few years ago and stood in the middle of the Colosseum. And you're surrounded by, concentric circles. And it's a bit like that. The sort of nearest circle is sort of the ministers and the MP, and the outer circles is kind of the masses, the public. And it is that. It's kind of surrounding the chief decision maker with nowhere to go. And that's what we did with Lucy's Law. We had Ricky saying it, we had cross-party MPs, we had most charities, we had the public, we had the select committee, we had the APPGs. So everyone was surrounding going, you need to do this.
Yeah, you have no choice.
You have no choice. So that's kind of the game. From coming up with something that needs to happen to basically providing that ambush. And then you'll change the law, if that's what you want to do. But there's also changing public behaviour. There's also raising awareness. There's so many strands to campaigning, sometimes all three. But they can all have a massive effect. Drinking water. When we started drinking water from bottles, seatbelts. No smoking in pubs or clubs. These are all things that once upon a time we were like, you'll never do that. And whether it's legislation or not, or behaviour change, stuff happens. And it's fascinating, and we're all part of it, and we all have the tools available to us to do it. We've just got to care enough about something to get to that next level and make it happen.
And where is the next 10 years looking? That's my final question. Where are we? Where's our goal?
So I've written a children's book, which I really want to get out there, which is kind of an anti-bullying, anti-prejudice, anti-racism children's picture book. Documentary comes out this autumn, hopefully on Netflix, which may lead to more documentary work. I hope it does. It was wonderful. It took 2 years to film, both here and in America. Maybe be involved with changing more laws, maybe doing more work with human charities as well as animal ones. It just continues, but it's the caliber and the profile of the stuff I'm being involved with now just gets higher and higher, which means kind of less work but more impact. So and just vetting. I just love being a vet. I mean, I love being in my consulting room, just dealing with cats and dogs and their owners. So, I'm involved with. I've done on the Brighton Pier, the starlings roost, about the starlings when they murmurate. I was involved with that. I do campaigning with the South Downs about responsible dog ownership during lambing season, for example, keeping dogs under control on leads, away from ground nesting birds. You can, we saved a bird seagull sanctuary in Sussex just by getting the mascots from Brighton Hove Albion, Gully and Sally, dressed up to stand in the aviary, surrounded by injured seagulls.
Oh my God!
So that's what I'm talking about in terms of the creativity and imagination, which I definitely got from my dad.
Yeah,
that's how you get noticed. Campaigning is all about getting noticed. In terms of people getting involved. So Lucy's Law, we had a 3 metre by 2 metre high Mother's Day card at a big dog show with Lucy's face in the middle. Yeah. We had to help change the law in Wales. We had 150 Welsh Springer Spaniels all wearing a Lucy's Law rosette and a Welsh bandana at a big dog show.
Yeah.
So visual publicity stunts, you can call them, thinking outside the box, all driven by creativity and imagination and a lack of resources. So all this stuff that we've heard today has been done on no money. So it just shows that you can really engage people, the public, MPs, celebrities, just by being creative and coming up with interesting brands and logos and alliterative hashtags. And you just need to sort of take a few risks as well. But it's been a hell of a journey. But
And have you always believed in yourself and your ability to do it?
I've always believed, I think, in the people around me that have helped me. And credit has to go to my campaigning team. I mean, we were a tiny bunch of volunteers: Julia, Sue, Linda, Philippa, Sarah. And the sort of 6 of us took on the pet industry, took on the government, took on all these big charities with PR departments and literally bottomless pockets. But we did it because we were patient and we were clever and we played that game of chess and we took our time and we didn't rise to any provocative behaviours or trolls or negativity. I led it, but I couldn't have done it without my team around me. Amazing. So I think that's also important, is to you can't do anything on your own. No one is bigger than a campaign. But everyone who fits into that and tessellates into that team brings something that no one else can do. And a decent team, and we had a phenomenal one, there's not one overlap. And it took us 10 years, and not once did any team member overlap into another person's skill set.
Wow.
And it was an honour to lead the team in Westminster, but absolutely phenomenal bunch of people. And they become your family because you share stuff that's so intimate, and the highs and mainly the lows of campaigning really do bring people together. A bit like people that meet like in an accident or some sort of disaster, you share an experience that's so heartbreaking or impactful, and it brings people together more than just meeting people in the bar, for example. So we still speak sort of every week, even though it's the campaign that we did was years ago, because we almost need that contact because we were so used to it. We were emailing each other 50, 60, 70, 80 times a day back in the campaigning years. We didn't have WhatsApp then. But things have changed. Things have become maybe slightly easier for people to communicate and connect with each other. But the aim is still the same. If you want to change something, the tools are definitely there to do it. And most of them, if not all, are completely free.
Amazing. Well, with that, we are all finished. So thank you so much for your time today. It was an amazing conversation. I feel like we could have talked forever. Perhaps we'll have to have you back. But thank you so much.
My pleasure, Hannah and Elliot.
Lovely.
Thank you both for your time and for inviting me here.
Thank you so much for being here. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, and leave a comment or rating, as it really helps us grow. You'll find any relevant resources in the description below, including details about our guest, links to anything we mention, and our application if you'd like to be a guest on Seasoned Professional. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for being a part of our community, and I cannot wait to see you next week. Bye-bye.
We're lost again.